pleasure to be here today with Dr. Steffi Friedrichs, who's a dear friend of mine and director of the NanoFabNet project, which is a project that is bringing together EU collaborators and US collaborators around the idea of sustainable nanofabrication. And so we're here today just to talk briefly about a celebration that's happening in the US that we're all fond of, that's coming up. It's called National Nanotechnology Day, or 10/9. It's an annual day. 10 to the 9 is the term that gives us a sense of the tiny scale of nano, and that's the number of zeros that come before the 1 when you look at a nanometer. And so we use this day to sort of remind ourselves what nanotechnology is all about. It's celebrated by a lot of different government agencies here in the US. A lot of different schools participate, companies, everyone does something fun around this day, again, just to help convey the size scale of nanotechnology and to remind us of the important role that nanotechnology plays in all of our lives. And it's played a particularly important role in the lives of Steffi and I. It's part of, gosh, I don't want to say it's been 2 decades, but it's been close to that we have known one another and been working on the area of sustainable nanotechnology. And I was just sitting here going through a book that Dr. Friedrichs helped make happen very, very early in our careers, and I'm always grateful to her for that. We are not joined today by another dear colleague of ours, Dr. Diana Bowman, but Steffi, I'll ask Steffi a little bit about her in just a moment as we talk about her work on this day. So part of our way of commemorating National Nanotechnology Day is by celebrating this US-EU partnership and talking a little bit about a really important paper that Steffi and Di recently published, talking about the role of nanotechnology as it relates to the development of COVID-19 vaccines and other aspects of COVID-19. So Steffi, I think we'll start maybe by letting you introduce yourself here, if you'd be willing to do that.
Thank you, Matt. It is a pleasure to be here. And like you, I'm going to go down memory lane a little bit. It was you who mentioned the nearly 2 decades. It is no secret that we have worked together a lot, and it has been a pleasure all the time. We are missing Diana today. She just sent a message saying that she had a medical emergency. We do hope that she is going to be okay. But she definitely deserves credit here. And the one thing that you should have mentioned is that this book that you and Diana once edited together, and for which I think it is actually the 3rd one in its series now. It has had 3 editions, and I had the pleasure to be asked to be involved one way or another for foreword or a preface, and it has been a pleasure all along. And I think one of them was actually translated into Russian, so that goes to show how international nanotechnology actually is. So it's nanotech all around, and it is definitely a nanotech theme that has connected us, including Diana, and which brings us together here.
So Steffi, one of the things that we want to talk about today is this paper that you co-authored with Dr. Diana Bowman, and the title of it is COVID-19 May Become Nanomedicine's Finest Hour Yet. And this appeared in Nature Nanotechnology earlier this spring. I think it was April 2021 that this paper came out. And we thought it'd be a good idea to talk about this paper today, just given its relevance to significant global events and also its emphasis on how nanotechnology can help us in some really globally challenging circumstances. So the first thing I wanted to ask you here, and I'll just ask you a few questions about the paper, and you feel free to comment as you feel appropriate. And that first question that I have is nanotechnology enabled, quote unquote, COVID-19 vaccines? Could you discuss briefly the role that Nano plays in the COVID-19 vaccines and why Nano was uniquely suited for this task?
So to cut a long story short, nanotech has over the years given specifically the life science sector a number of tools which enable the life science sector to become a lot more accurate in analyzing what it looks at. And these are imaging tools, these are diagnostic tools, to become a lot faster in this analysis, talking about lab-on-a-chip devices where a very small sample now is enough in order to do a very fast detection of, let's say, insulin, for example, and blood sugar levels. So a lot of these low invasive or non-invasive detection mechanisms, the insulin scanners that people are now wearing instead of having to do the finger prick all the time, a lot of these are enabled by nanotechnology one way or another. So nanotech is essentially a very elegant tool that allows us to work in medicine in some ways a lot faster, but also down to a scale where we not necessarily have been before. And the other thing that nanotech does very well, it is a brilliant tool for what has for a long time been known as biomimicry. And that is seeing how something works in nature and then thinking, surely I can build one of those that functions similarly from a different material or from a similar material, but basically assembling it in the lab as opposed to letting nature assemble it. Sometimes you need to go a completely different route from how nature has built it before, but you essentially arrive at something that mimics what nature is already coming up with. The difference is that we need to put in a lot of energy and a lot of research, and we have to do it with very complicated equipment, whereas with nature it just seems to happen miraculously. But the idea is to understand what these systems are, and one of these systems, and that is the core of these vaccines, is the cell. It's the cell wall itself, and specifically the capsule that mimics what a virus looks like, and which allows us to then pretend that it is a virus without having the nasty side effects of the virus inside the virus capsule.
That's excellent. And I like how you wove that all together with there's a lot of technology, science and technology that we've been working on for many decades, and Nano brings in some complementary tools that really help us with some overcoming some of the major challenges that we've encountered in some of these areas. And I think your paper talks about that very nicely. Nano, you noted in the paper that Nano isn't a panacea for healthcare challenges. Do you think that the enabling role that Nano has played in COVID-19 vaccine development will accelerate interest in nanomedicine, perhaps a little bit more broadly than where it was beforehand? I know early on in the nano hype cycle, there was a lot of interest in nanomedicine, and then it sort of became somewhat quiet. I think the publications continued to churn out, but we certainly hadn't seen nano deployed on this type of scale, the same type of scale as what we're seeing with the COVID-19 vaccine. So I guess in short, might we be entering a golden age for nano-enabled healthcare?
There's two answers to that. One answer is that, of course, like all other technologies and research in technology, that has been found to be desperately important in order to be prepared for pandemics like we are experiencing one now. We did find that it is research and technology, and it's the driving edge of research and technology that helps us to overcome these challenges and hopefully get life to as normal as possible relatively soon. And in that matter, it is not only nanotechnology that will, I wouldn't call it golden age, but that will probably see a lot more interest now. It is all forms of life sciences. It is all forms of diagnostic sciences to now enable a rapid diagnosis. And we saw that already. It took a long time to get a single test done at the beginning of the pandemic, and now tests are so rapidly deployed and they are done so quickly, and you can even get the kits for doing the test at home. So we saw a lot of improvement in a very short time, and all of that was driven by science and technology. And as part of that, nanotech will of course, continue to play a strong role of constantly enabling us to increase our knowledge in the understanding of diseases that we are battling against, including infectious diseases like this one. And it will also continue to be part of the tool set of coming up with new ways in order to either diagnose them better or treat them better or prevent them better through a vaccine that we have now.
So inherent in what you talk about with the development of these new technologies and nano-enabled healthcare innovations is the due diligence that goes into that. So the process of looking at the efficacy and also the health and safety aspects of it. Are you somewhat surprised? And I say this with Nano because we really did a good job, I think, of getting out in front of Nano and looking at we called it responsible innovation, I think, trying to get out ahead of Nano and make sure that as we develop these new solutions, we're paying constant attention to health and safety implications, both on humans and on the natural environment. So I have to ask, have you noticed with this, there's been a somewhat polarizing response from the public to the COVID-19 vaccine. Some folks are very much in favor of them. And there's a large part of the population, particularly here in the US, that's concerned about them. Has this response by the public been somewhat surprising to you? And based on this response, how do you see, how do we define, pursue, and communicate responsible innovation publicly in the future? How do we handle these sorts of situations where we're working really hard to develop tools to help the public, but at the same time, the public isn't necessarily trusting of what it is that scientists are doing?
Well, I find it difficult to answer that one because I think there is no scientist out there who wasn't hand on heart surprised as to the reservations and concerns, and quite often, unfortunately, total misinformation and for that reason, deliberate misinformation that was making the rounds. So for a lot of us as scientists, as technologists, we were probably, if not all of us, we were probably very surprised as to what depth in society that had reached and how many people there are that are concerned. And I think these concerns need to be heard, they need to be listened to, they need to be appreciated by people, and we do need to find a way in order to address them. Now, I'm speaking about these concerns where people genuinely don't believe in science, are not surrounded by science the way that we are in our daily jobs, and therefore have a totally fine reason to say, I'm concerned, I'd like to know more. And that is something that is our responsibility. But on the topic of responsible research and innovation, which is one of these things where I actually think the COVID-19 vaccination story is a wonderful example as how it has worked. Because I think without getting, in the past few years, getting into the minds of people that there needs to be a much more open collaboration between industry, academia, and governmental laboratories and governmental policy making with regard to science and technology and funding of science and technology, without this actually making progress and at the same time letting it happen in society, we would never have seen this collaboration of what sometimes is called the triple helix of government, industry, university interaction, which we understand at the heart of responsible innovation, if it hadn't been for such a strong driver like a pandemic. So I actually think when it comes to responsible research and innovation, we are only at the beginning of figuring out how we can actually fully make that happen in all sorts of science and technology areas. And COVID-19 is a brilliant example.
I think that's a great answer because on one hand, you might feel compelled to sort of throw your hands up and think we've really missed the mark. But I think what you just said about being at the front end of that is exactly where we are, and learning how we do responsible innovation, how we engage with the public. I know here in the US, our work it's largely publicly funded. So these are taxpayers who have these questions. This is work we're doing for them. So they need to be a party to the discoveries and understanding what's happening. But I do agree the misinformation, I think, is a separate issue that has to be addressed in another way, because we do need to be working from the same set of facts on a lot of these issues. So, okay, we're almost out of time, and I just had one last question for you. Again, just to in honor of National Nano Day here in the U.S., this kind gesture of our EU collaborators to recognize this occasion with us. Can you comment briefly on how important EU and US collaborations have been in the development of nano-enabled innovations like the COVID-19 vaccines? I think you've touched on it a little bit, but I'll give you a chance here just to explicitly sort of cover that topic.
Well, I think you and I sitting here is one of the best example of EU-US collaborations. Not that either one of us came up with a vaccine, that's for sure. But I think we are the little grassroots initiatives that keep the collaboration going, and that have been there for the longest time in order to, sometimes on the personal level, sometimes on the organized level, like we're now doing under NanoFabNet, where 2 US organizations, Georgia Tech and Virginia Tech, are part of this European funded project. And yes, we are doing nanofabrication, but nanofabrication also is working with material on the nanometer scale. It is a very specific way of working with the material, but it's not that unlike what vaccine development is all about. And if you look at how some of these vaccines were actually developed, they were developed in collaboration of US and EU companies. So in the case of the Pfizer-BioNTech, or here we say BioNTech Pfizer, it was a relatively young startup, and I think it had probably reached a funding round where you wouldn't say startup anymore, but it was a relatively young company that had come up with the technology behind the vaccine. And it was Pfizer that in the US, a large US pharmaceutical company, that then took on the large scale further development, the scale up and the manufacturing. And I think that speaks for itself how these collaborations essentially work, and how they should be allowed to work. We can only tackle problems like this through international collaboration. And it is not only the US-EU, the US and EU collaboration obviously is a very strong axis and has always been, but it involves other parts of the world as well, including what we now need to look at a lot more strongly is how can we make this collaborative exercise more inclusive and more available to the poorer countries.
Thanks so much, Steffi. That was a wonderful answer. Thanks again for working with us on this. And just a reminder to anyone who may be listening and watching, National Nano Day is October 9th. And if you'd like to learn more about it, visit nano.gov. And with that, Steffi, I think we'll wrap it up. Thanks again. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me, Matt. I'm still so sorry to have missed Diana here today, but I wish all of you a happy National Nanotechnology Day in the US.